I want to invite you to open your Bibles to Colossians chapter 1. That's where we're going to be at today in verses 15 through 23. As we began our journey through this little book last week, as you're turning there, I'm curious to do this exercise with you. What I want you to do is I want you to think about the person in your life that you just adore, that you love, that's maybe made a huge impact on your life. Just somebody that you're like, thank God for this person. And I want you to try to imagine your life and what it would be like if that person never existed. I don't mean like you had them and they passed away or they moved away. I mean they just never existed. How different would your life be? I'm going to call this the It's a Wonderful Life exercise, you know? It's a Wonderful Life. I know that's like a Christmas movie, but it's technically not, so I think it's okay that I'm talking about it in March. But the movie, right? You have Jimmy Stewart. He's playing George Bailey. He lives in Bedford Falls. He's got a great life, a great family. He's made a huge impact on this little quaint, quintessential little town. But one day, things go sideways, he's in a rough spot, and he thinks to himself, I wish I never existed. And he gets this glimpse of what life would be like if he had never existed. And so Bedford Falls goes from this really quaint, idyllic sort of place to live to this place that maybe no one wants to live. It's a little rough, and he sees the impact that he had on so many people's lives and how all these other people are way worse off because he never existed, right? It's a Wonderful Life sort of exercise, I wonder if we did the It's a Wonderful Life exercise with Jesus, what it would be like. What would the world be like if Jesus didn't exist? I mean, could you imagine our world without Jesus? If you can go back in time and just pluck him out of history, how would today be different? Would we have hospitals? How Christians created this institutionalized version of a hospital and care for people. A lot of you work in the medical field. If we had no Loma Linda, no Kaiser, no Beaver Medical, no Redlands Community, what would you do for a living even, right? No hospitals? Would we have universities? A university system kind of founded by Christians upon this truth that God is a God of all knowledge. He wants us to know him and how to live in this world. He's a God we can know things, right? He's created us to know things. How would that affect humanitarian relief? There's an author at Baylor named Rodney Stark. He wrote a book called The Triumph of Christianity. And in that book, he estimates that if all the churches in the world disappeared overnight somehow, $2.6 trillion a year would be lost in giving towards humanitarian efforts. Christians are generous people, right? What year would it be, you guys? What year would it be? I have no idea, right? We have the whole before BC, AD, Jesus turned the calendar upside down, didn't he? Right? Jesus has impacted our world more than anyone in human history, and it's not even close. So we can think about all these things, but what about your life? Would you have hope? Would you have any transformation? Would you be reconciled to God? Our text today shows us because Jesus is, our lives are forever different. That's what Colossians 1, 15 through 23 is showing us. It's saying Jesus is, so now you are. Well, who is Jesus? That's the first question. Who is Jesus? In verses 15 through 20, we see this. So read with me here in verse 15. Jesus is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him, and he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross. Paul basically says to the church in Colossae and to us today, he goes, let me introduce you to Jesus. I want to introduce you to Jesus. And he gives 8 titles for Jesus. We don't just get to pick and choose the ones we want, right? He gives us 8 titles. And so to the best that I can with the time that I have, we're going to start just by looking at who is Jesus and walk through these titles, okay? We want to embrace all that he is as a whole. We're going to stare at Jesus here. The first 4 titles Paul uses describe Jesus as Lord over creation. He's Lord over creation. The last 4 is describing Jesus as Lord over the new creation. Okay? So look first. What is he? He's the image. He's the image. We see this in verse 15. He's the image of the invisible God. This is saying here to you that God is invisible, that we can't see God because God is spirit. Okay? Put it like this. God is an artist. We are the painting. Right? He is outside of creation. We can't see God, but God in his goodness has placed an image of himself inside of creation. You're probably familiar with this phrase. If you look at the beginning of your Bible in Genesis chapter 1, on the 6th day, we're told God makes man and woman. And he says, let us make them in our image, right? That our root identity is to bear image to who God is, right? This is known throughout the Bible. This was actually pretty common even in the ancient world, how kings would go into parts of their kingdom and they would set up statues around that reflected their image so that when you walked around, you would see the image and you go, oh yeah, that guy's king. All right, he's the king. And so God has made human beings, you and me, to reflect his image, and we've been told to fill the earth so that we go out through all the earth and we bear image to who the king actually is. Right? But the problem is we have marred that image. We've twisted that image. Right? We are made in his image, but we have distorted that image because of our sin. We don't reflect who God is so often. But here we're told Jesus is the true image. He's the perfect image. Right? So essentially, if you want to know what God is like, look at Jesus. Look at Jesus. He is God. Right, so some of us form images of God in terms of what we think God is like, and they're often a reaction to experiences that we have in our life. Right, so we have a really horrible dad or something who just wanted to control our lives or whatever. And so we kind of import that image onto God and we go, that's what God is like. And so we struggle to see God as a loving God, a loving Father. Right? Or we see God as someone who's like a life coach or something like that, who's just like, hey, I recommend these things, but hey, you don't have to do them, and this sort of thing. And we distort the image of God. We take that image, we import it onto God, and we fail to see that God is a judge and that one day we will stand before him and give account for how we lived our life. And so we need to come in alignment with who God is. And so if you want to know what God is like, we look at Jesus. He's the image. But secondly, what does it say? He's the firstborn of all creation. He's the first. He's the first. This does not mean that there was a time that Jesus didn't exist and then he existed. That's not what this means. This is not like, we don't want to import our natural connotation for what a firstborn is, right? Jesus is not the trial run, if you're a firstborn, or if you have kids, you know this, right? You were trying things and then you've learned by kid 3 or 2 even, you're like, I'm sorry, we figured this out a little bit better now, right? Jesus is not a personality type, right? He's not type A, just trying to control the house or whatever your image is of a firstborn. No, this is a title of rank, right? He's first. He owns it all, right? Jesus owns this place. And so the question is, does he own your life? Does he own your life? He is first, right? Not your career, not your kids, not your social life or your hobbies and that schedule that demands, not your grades, your education, not that significant other that you adore, not your body image, not your sexuality. He's first. And notice it doesn't say that he should be first. It just says he is first. He is first. Our lives are meant to have Jesus as first. I've heard it described this way, that if you ever look at wood, right, there's the grain in the wood, and the grain flows in a direction, doesn't it? Wood grain flows in a direction. The grain of life flows towards Jesus, and if you want to go against the grain, you're going to get splinters, right? Because he is first. He is first. Why is he first? Number 3, he's the creator. Verse 16, for by him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. This word all, and I'm throwing in the word everything, it comes up 9 times in our passage this morning. Jesus is over all things. He made all things. He owns all things. What did he create? All things. Right? That means when you look at the San Bernardino Mountains, who made those? Jesus did. When you go out to Joshua Tree and you climb some rocks, who made those rocks? Jesus did. When you go up to Yosemite and you look at Half Dome and you're in awe, who made that? Jesus did. When you go to Newport or Laguna and you stare at the crystally looking water out there, who made that ocean? Jesus. When you look at a newborn, who made that newborn? Jesus. When you look at your fingernail, who made that? Jesus. Right? When you go watch Shohei Ohtani or Mike Trout hit the baseball, who made that? Jesus. Who made art? Jesus. Who made cockroaches? Satan, right? No, I'm just kidding. No. That's where the passage goes, right? Jesus is the creator over all things, the spiritual world, right? He's over your emotions. He's created emotions, the material and your emotions. Everything comes from Jesus. Every government is accountable to Jesus because he's made all things. They belong to him. They are from him and they're for him, is what it says. Because he's made us. You could say all of life is all for Jesus. If he made everything, then there's not a part of me that I just negotiate with him, like this is yours and this is mine. You can have this, but you can't have this. That's not how it works. He made everything. He's the creator, and all things are made for him. Number 4, verse 17 says he's the center. He's the center. He's before all things, and in him all things hold together. That's why I asked you, imagine what the world would be like without Jesus. Well, the reality is there wouldn't be a world without Jesus. Right? If he ceased to exist, everything would just unravel. Right? Everything would just fall apart. He's like the Jenga block that if you pull out, it all just comes crashing down, right? Hebrews chapter 1 says Jesus upholds the universe by the word of his power. He's holding everything together. Right? This is you know that phrase, I was today years old when I learned that, whatever, fill in the blank kind of thing. It was 2 weeks ago that I learned this, and if you're an astrophysicist or I don't even know, something with space, you could probably correct me here, but that's fine, right? But I learned this, that did you know that the planet Jupiter has protected Earth since the beginning of time, that its gravitational pull, right, has protected all these asteroids and space rocks from just like pummeling the Earth and making it uninhabitable. Because Jupiter exists, and how massive it is and its gravitational pull, the Earth is the way it is. It's incredible, really, right? So I have a ton of respect for Jupiter, right? I used to not care too much about Jupiter. Now I really am thankful for Jupiter. It's a great thing, this sort of idea. But my point is, most things in life don't have to be true you don't have to know them in order for them to be true. Do you know what I'm saying? Jesus is holding everything together. And you and I, rarely think about that. Some of you have never thought about that. He's the center. If he ceased to exist, everything would cease to exist. He is the sustainer. He is the truly responsible one. He's the truly trustworthy one. He's the faithful one. He's sustaining you. He's the center. Number 5, he's the head. He's the head. This is where we get into that new creation titles that Paul moves to. He says, and he is the head of the body, the church. If you think about it, our heads tell our bodies what to do. Our heads are very important, they tell you what you're feeling. They tell you what to think. They tell your body what to do. Right? They breathe in and breathe out. You taste things, you digest things through your mouth, you smell, you hear, you see. And without your head, you got nothing, right? This is saying Jesus is the head of the church, meaning he's the head of Pathway. He's the head of every church that's gathering across this planet this morning, worshiping him, right? And so, newsflash, right? I'm technically not the lead pastor of Pathway. Jesus is the lead pastor of Pathway. He's the chief shepherd. And so somebody like me or any other pastor or any other leader in our church is somebody who's just meant to posture ourselves before God going, God, what do you want for us? Jesus, what do you want for our church? What are you trying to do in this city? We want to be a part of that, right? We take our orders from him. He informs us on what we should be doing. We should be listening to that, to be informed by him according to that, because the hand doesn't tell the head what to do. It never goes in reverse. My knee has never told my mind what to do, right? My knee does what my head tells my knee to do. And it's the same is true with Jesus. He's the head. Number 6, he's the resurrection. Notice this. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. He's the firstborn of the dead. He is what he told Martha outside the tomb of his friend Lazarus. I am the resurrection and the life. Right? Jesus is the death-crushing, life-bringing king. Right? In Acts chapter 2, right when God sends the Spirit, Peter stands up and preaches, and he talks about how Jesus died. He went into the grave, but there was these pangs of the tomb, these pangs of death, because it couldn't hold him. Death couldn't hold him. He's like, death looks at him and says, you don't belong here. That's an image of a womb that Peter's using there. There's these pangs of birth. And Jesus, after 3 days, comes out of this tomb and into new life, never to go into the grave again. Right? So with Jesus, because of his perfect life, the tomb becomes this womb. Right? And he's the first one out of that grave. He is alive. He's never died again. He's the firstborn of the dead. I don't know if you thought of this. Jesus has a body today, that the eternal God has taken on flesh and he's never rid himself of it, right? And so today, Jesus is in heaven with a body. There's a pastor named Ray Ortland that once said something years ago, and it caught me off guard. He says, when I pray, I like to picture Jesus' arm hair. And I was like, that's gross, But then I thought about it, and I was like, what a powerful thing. What he's doing is he's going, when I'm praying, when I'm talking to God, he's real. He's really resurrected. He's really ascended. He's really coming again. So if you don't want to look at arm hair, think about his beard or something, right? Zoom in close. Don't create a weird image of Jesus, right? But nonetheless, he's real. He's alive. He's resurrected. He's the firstborn. That tomb became a womb and he came out of it. And now anybody who's trusted in Jesus as their Savior, as their Savior and Lord, that we are now told that he is the firstborn. He's the older brother. right? That when you die, you're not facing a grave, you're facing a womb. And that womb will give birth to a resurrected life one day for you. Death doesn't have the final word. New life does with Jesus. Number 7, we see that Jesus is the fullness. He's the fullness. In him, all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell. He's fully God. He's not kind of God. He's not just godly. He's God. And people in our world, sometimes us included, we will never disrespect Jesus, but we often tend to try to demote him. I mean, just think about every cult in this world. They'll have tons of respect for Jesus, but they're always demoting him. Think about Mormonism. They'll say Jesus isn't fully God. If you actually read, they'll say he's brothers with Lucifer. Jehovah's Witnesses say Jesus isn't fully God. He's just a New Testament version of the Archangel Gabriel. Right? You think of Islam. It says Jesus isn't fully God. He was a really good prophet. Right? You think of Buddhism. Jesus wasn't fully God. He wasn't God, but he was really enlightened. Or Hinduism. He's not God, but he was pretty holy. Right? Every belief system in this world takes Jesus. They don't hate Jesus. They respect Jesus, but they demote Jesus. That's what we do. Guys, respecting Jesus doesn't make you a Christian. It doesn't make you a Christian. Worshiping Jesus is what Christians do because he's God. Number 8, he's the reconciler. He's the reconciler. It says, through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross. This word reconcile, it's teaching you, it's sharing with us this idea of there's two people opposed to one another. They're not in a relationship with one another. So there's enemies of some sort, and someone, in order to reconcile a relationship, has to cross the enemy lines and try to make peace between two parties. So what this is saying is that we were not reconciled to God. We weren't joined in right relationship with God. And so God himself has sent Jesus to cross those enemy lines and to bring us in right relationship with God. And it's not just saying that, though. It's talking about reconciling all things, which this is not universalism. This is just telling you about the new heavens and new earth reality that's coming one day, that heaven and earth will become one in Jesus. This is the truth here, that every area of life that's been touched by sin must also be touched by God's grace. So when sin entered the world, creation was put under a curse. Even creation needs to be redeemed. So notice it says that he makes peace by the blood of his cross. Jesus came to reconcile us to God, and the way that he reconciles us is through his death. It's to pay the debt that separated us from God. Right? It's not universalism because this reconciliation reality is only experienced by those who turn to Jesus. To say, I've got this debt that I owe. I can't pay for it. And if you look to Jesus and you look to him dying on the cross, he pays that debt for you if you've received that forgiveness. See, what the Bible teaches us is that our sin, the way that we've lived our life, what that earns us, the wage of that. If you think of your job, you work, you get a wage, you earn something from that work. What the Bible teaches us is that our lives, we earn a wage, and that wage, what we've earned, is death. But Jesus comes as the reconciler to pay for that debt so that you can have him pay for it, or you could go, no, I'm going to hold on to this debt, and then one day you get to stand before God and have to pay for it yourself. And that won't be a good day. So he comes as the reconciler. This is who Jesus is. We don't get to pick and choose. I don't know if you guys have ever eaten at a Sizzler before, right? You guys know Sizzler? Man, I grew up loving Sizzler. probably too much. We didn't have one in my hometown, so if we traveled from Helena, Montana to Missoula or Spokane, we had a Sizzler, I was like, can we go to Sizzler, you know? And Sizzler is like one of those places you can sit down, you can do the normal restaurant thing, have a menu, order, they'll go get you your food, that kind of thing. But what's great about Sizzler is, well, one, you don't do that, because at Sizzler, you go, I'll get the buffet. Right, you get the buffet. You go to the salad bar, you load up the salad on a whole plate just so you don't feel guilty about everything else you're going to eat, right? You go eat the salad, and you go back, and you get a bunch of different entrees that are hot, and you eat all those, and even if you're full, you go back for the ice cream, right? And you load that up too. You know, it's an amazing experience, but what you do is you go through the line, and you go, I like this, I don't like this, I'll take this, I don't want that, right? And we make for ourselves a meal that we actually like. Guys, Jesus is not a buffet line. That's what I'm saying. You don't read these titles of him and go, I like this one, I don't know about that. I could use that one. This one I'll leave. That's not how this works. Jesus is more like, I'll say it this way, Jamba Juice. Right, you go to a Jamba Juice, they have the ingredients, they're real ingredients, they put them in the smoothie, they blend it up together, and you're presented with the smoothie, right? You don't get to take the smoothie and go, I'm going to pick out this spinach or this arugula and the blueberries. You can't, right? They're there. If you want to drink the smoothie, right, you have to take the whole thing or reject it. Right? That's the same with Jesus. This is who he is. This is who he is. He's the image. He's the first, the creator, the center, the head, the resurrection, the fullness, the reconciler. So what difference has he made in your life? That's the last question. What difference has he made in your life? Verse 21, and you who were alienated and hostile in mind, doing evil deeds, he is now reconciled in his body of flesh by his death in order to present you holy and blameless and above reproach before him. If indeed you continue in the faith, steadfast, stable, not shifting from the hope of the gospel that you heard, which has been proclaimed in all creation under heaven, and of which I, Paul, became a minister. Paul says, you were this. You were alienated. You were distanced from. You were unable to be in right relationship with God. Right? It's like picture that person you love. Maybe they've passed away. They've moved out of state. You go, oh, I so wish that I could be with that person again. Right? That's that idea. Like you can't be with God. You were alienated from him. But what to make matters worse, you didn't even want to be with him. It's not the same. Because what does it say? You were hostile to him. What does that mean? It means that you saw God as an obstacle in your life. Someone to avoid, not someone to embrace. And you were doing evil deeds. Do you mean that every single thing you ever did in your life was evil? But evil, the idea that there is good and evil. There's not good, okay, and evil. There's good and evil. There's things that God has made, that God has designed that we go, he goes, that's good. And anything that's not lived out according to that, he goes, that's evil, it's not of me. And we too often choose. Our hearts want to choose. They go after these other things. But look at this. But now, meaning today, present tense, verse 22, he has reconciled you in his body of flesh by his death. Jesus brings you to God through his cross. Guys, in light of who we've seen Jesus to be, this is stunning. This is stunning. Let me ask you, what is so wonderful about the cross? Well, what is so breathtaking about the cross? It wasn't just how Christ died, that it was brutal, that he suffered in agony, although that's true. What's so breathtaking about the cross is not where it happened. It's not how it happened. It's not when it happened. It's not even why it happened. It's who it happened to. Right? It's who it happened to. The cross happened to the image of the invisible God. The cross happened to the firstborn of all creation. The cross happened to the one who all things were made, and through him all things hold together and are for him. It happened to the Creator who things were made for, to the one who the fullness of God dwelled in. It happened to him. This is what it cost you. Cost to bring you back into right relationship with God. The method was the death of the Son of God himself, the fullness of God. Why did he do this? Well, verse 22 tells you, in order to present you holy, blameless, above reproach, so above suspicion, before God one day, that you would stand there. Jesus died so that you could stand there and so that you would be brought in to live with God forever. What's the condition? There's a condition here. It says that you continue in the faith, steadfast, stable. What does that mean? He tells you, not shifting from the hope of the gospel that you heard. It says you have this picture of Jesus. Do you have this picture of what he's done? Do you have this hope now in him? Don't bounce off of that. Don't shift from that. Don't move on to something else thinking that'll be better. Right? Don't go, yes, he's my hope, and then one day you go, you know what, like this group of my job or this group at my school or the crowd is now saying this, you know what, my hope is that I would be accepted over here in this group, right? Be acceptable to this crowd, that the world would look at me and go, hey, good job. Yeah, great. I'm not going to shift and hope into that now, right? It also means that I don't go, Jesus, I'm all about your kingdom, but I'm waiting for the kingdom to fully come and be realized, and I begin to shift my hope and go, you know, this political tribe over here, they're promising me that if I just do this, that they can bring this in, right? So my hope is now in this world. No, don't shift your hope, right? Keep your hope. Keep focused on Jesus. Keep him first, right? Don't shift. Don't bounce from that hope because Jesus is. Our lives are different. We have a hope that is not found anywhere else. When he comes into your life, you're going to be different. He's the great reconciler. So I'm curious, do you want to be reconciled to God? Do you want to be reconciled to God one day? I once heard this famous Ernest Hemingway short story. It's called The Capital of the World. Maybe you're familiar with it. But in this story, Hemingway tells the story of a father and his teenage son. And his son really wrongs and hurts the father. He sins against his father. And so his son runs away. He runs away. And so the father just goes searching after the son that he loves. He goes all over Spain, is where the story takes place. Can't find him anywhere, so he finally goes to Madrid. And as a last-ditch effort, he puts out an ad in the newspaper to his son, hoping his son, praying his son will see it. And this is what the ad reads. Paco, meet at Hotel Montana, noon Tuesday. All is forgiven. So that's what the ad in the paper says. So he sends out the ad. He prays that maybe his son is going to see the ad and come and show up. That's like the great hope. So on Tuesday, the father in the story, he arrives at Hotel Montana, but there's a lot going on. There's a lot of chaos. There's police there because they're trying to manage this crowd that is gathered. And in Hemingway's story, he says there were 800 young men named Paco that showed up to the hotel that day. 800 young men named Paco read the ad in the newspaper and hoped it was for them. 800 Pacos came to receive the forgiveness that they needed. So I think it's great. What a powerful story, I think. Because it's showing us the world is hungry for reconciliation. It is hungry for reconciliation. Your heart is hungry to be reconciled to God, and if you're not a Christian, you might not even realize that's what it's hungry for. Because you were made for God. and you've been alienated from him. But the invitation is to see that God didn't say, hey, come, try to find me, try to get up here. But no, he came and he sought you, as we sang, when a stranger, wandering from him. He rescued you from danger and interposed his precious blood. You might realize that you're someone who's here, you don't know Jesus, and you've been checking him out, but you haven't received his grace. You haven't received his forgiveness. You haven't received him as the rightful ruler of your life. And you realize today that you're like, yeah, I am alienated from him. You know, I have seen God as more of an obstacle in my life. And all the things that I've said that I've seen that he told me to do, I've wanted not to do those sorts of things. I'm here to tell you, though, that there is a real outstanding ad in the world. It's called the gospel. And it says, come home to your God through Jesus. It's a true ad. It's not a fictitious story like Hemingway's. It's a real ad. And it's saying, come home to him. You find your hope in him. Maybe you're here today and you are a Christian. I want to ask you, have you shifted your hope? Have you bounced off of it? Are there ways that you've maybe demoted Jesus in your life? You know, I like that. I don't know about that one. Have you treated Jesus like a buffet? Is he someone you respect, or is he someone you worship? Someone that you've denied, or someone that you lay before and just awe and wonder? Do you know him? Do you really know him? If you do, your life is forever different. And it's only going to get better. So don't shift. Keep your eyes on him. Let's bow our heads as we go into a time of prayer, as we think about this text and how it applies to our lives. You know, in Matthew 16, Jesus goes to his disciples and he goes, who do the people say that I am? He said, some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, some say Jeremiah, one of the prophets. And Jesus says to his disciples, who do you say that I am? And Peter says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Lord Jesus, this morning, I pray that as you ask us that same question, that we wouldn't respond picking and choosing, but that we would respond just overwhelmed by the gravity of how amazing, how beyond us, how so unlike us you are in every way. As the perfect image, as the one who's before all things, as our creator, as our sustainer, as our head, as our resurrection, as our God. God, help us to see how and why. I mean, you bled for us. We could know you. I pray that would give us just a fixed hope today that we would never want to waver from. Longing to be with you one day forever. So, Lord, we don't want to come into a room like this tritely today and just kind of go about our lives, but would you Wreck us, God. As we encounter the reality of who you are, would you change us? Would you transform us? Would you help us to see what you've done and how you've united us to Christ and how now everything is different? Lord, help us to see that today. Help us to live that out in the days to come. By your grace, we pray these things. In your Son's name, amen.